My name is Christina Shih. I'm the Associate Director. Thank you, Doug. Associate Director for Press Forward. And as you heard Dale mention on the main stage today, one of the most exciting things about this past year has been engaging with so many of our local funders who are raising their hands in their communities to launch local chapters. And we kind of have a nice sized crowd. I just kind of wanted to get a show of hands. You know, we have 36 chapters now. Raise your hand if you are leading a chapter. All right, okay. Raise your hand if you are chapter curious. Okay, all right. And raise your hand if you are a newsroom leader or someone in the field who wants to learn more about how you might engage with your local chapter. Okay, great. Well, we hope that this session will leave you with some inspiration, some more connections, or some ideas of how we can all work together in the coming years. So, as Dale said, our chapters are funder-led initiatives that are focused on strengthening the media ecosystems in their backyards. And I fondly call them our mini press forwards because they're doing everything that we're doing at the national level. They are fundraising. They're engaging with new donors, conducting deep ecosystem research to understand what is the media landscape and what do their audiences need. They are supporting local news providers and getting money out into the field. And today I am thrilled to introduce 4 incredible chapter leaders who will share how this work unfolds in practice. So joining me today, we have Jesus Garcia Gonzalez, Senior Program Officer at the San Antonio Area Foundation, home of Press Forward San Antonio. Lizzy Hazeltine, Director of the North Carolina Local News Lab Fund, which is home to not 1, but 2 chapters, North Carolina and Charlotte. And we have Iowa in the house, Nancy Van Milligen, President and CEO of the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque, which is home to Press Forward in Northeast Iowa. And we have Mauricio Palma from my home state in California. He is the Director of Community Building at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, home to Press Forward Silicon Valley. Okay, so we got a lot of questions, but we really want to open it up and have time for your questions afterwards. So keep an eye, we have microphones. But first, I want to start with you, Jesus. Exactly 1 year ago, you were on a panel just like this. You had just newly formed your chapter, you just barely begun, and we're about to embark on conducting a landscape assessment of San Antonio. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the San Antonio Press Forward chapter serves 8 counties in South Central Texas, which are home to more than 2.5 million people. So we really wanted to first understand how to navigate our landscape and who was active, what gaps were there in services. So we opened an RFP process to try to really bring as many applicants as we could to help us make an assessment of our landscape. And after several rounds of interviews, we ended up with 2 really top-notch and very different candidates. One was local. They knew the ecosystem well, but they had never done any sort of ecosystem mapping in the area. The other was a national firm that perhaps did not know the community as well, but they had extensive experience in the field. And because we were so new into the space, we really wanted to have a firm that was more of a thought partner and that could help us guide and learn through this process. So we ended up going with a national firm, News Revenue Hub, to help us do our assessment.
And so I know you were balancing a local or a national firm, and what were the pros and cons, what were the trade-offs that you made by working with a national firm, and how did you try to get ahead of these?
Yeah, so we knew that no matter who you end up selecting as a partner to do this work, there's always going to be trade-offs in the process. So we were willing to take those on. And so one of the things that I think made this extremely successful was the fact that from the beginning, we knew that our ecosystem had to be rooted in community to enable those voices that had never been at the table to be at the front and center. As an immigrant myself, one of the first things that we wanted to do was to ensure that voices that have never been in the conversation were able to participate in the survey process. So we called our city immigration office to help us understand what other groups across our landscape were on the rise, which led us to translate the survey into Chinese, Arabic, Pashto, Vietnamese, and Spanish, right? And so the survey being available in so many different languages allow us to really have a better and broader scope as to who we would reach. The next step was truly to just trust in our superpower as a community foundation, which is already leaning into this relationships that we have in community. So I reached out to organizations that were already serving in rural areas, that are already serving in underserved communities, and that we're already serving in our disabled community to try to understand how to truly step into that world. And truly what made our study really successful were three things. One, the leadership of News Revenue Hub. I think they were amazing in terms of reaching out to the plethora of newsrooms that are out there in our area, and also conducting a blast of email list throughout the whole county. The second piece was the trust that Texas Public Radio had in us. So they actually posted a banner on their website for a whole month to encourage people to participate in the survey. But truly what pushed us over the edge in having our ecosystem be so successful was the fact that we were able to take the barriers for individuals to participate in the survey. And what I mean by that is that we didn't ask people to come to our events. We went to their communities, we traveled far distances, and we were able to be in their space and on their time, and which often meant going to events on the weekends or after hours, which are not attractive, but we have to do what we need to do in order to get the participation that we want. We also offer food, and we compensated people for their time, their knowledge, and their insight. Because a lot of times we ask individuals to participate in surveys, and it ends up being a very extractive process. And so we didn't want this to be another one of those survey taking events. The other thing is that we were willing to have volunteers, right? So on one of the sessions, we worked with blind and low vision impaired individuals. And so we brought volunteers who could help actually read the surveys to individuals and help them fill out the survey. In other events, I was the survey taker and the reader to individuals that did not know how to read, right? And so the other last event that we had was that we were able to pay for 2 staff members of one of our community organizations to actually stand outside a supermarket that caters to refugees so that they can actually have conversations in their language and allow them to take the survey and get a gift card afterwards. So I think it was a multi-layer effect that made our ecosystem be very successful.
And I love that because it was really a collaborative and trust-building process. You're building those relationships from the start with both the newsrooms and the communities that you serve. So Mauricio, I want to shift to you because you've been in the silent phase. Your trust-building actually began within your organization, in your own foundation. Can you tell us more about the internal outreach that you did and why this has been such a crucial step to the launch of your chapter?
So, well, the Community Foundation.
Oh.
Pardon?
Oh, Mauricio.
That's okay.
I was like, that wasn't the right question.
Oh no, now you know that we prepped,
we
y'all.
finished each other's sentences, so this is, you're seeing it in action.
Nancy and I have been hanging out quite a bit, so you can actually answer my question. So first of all, thank you for inviting us to the conversation. I feel that I'm always ill-equipped to represent such a diverse community when I speak. So please know that this year for us has been a year of listening, a year of trying to understand what's going on within our own community, and bringing that into the design moving forward. Internally, and I would say that externally, Ramona, who's sitting close to the front here from San Jose Spotlight, was a person that really came to the foundation and said, you guys need to take a look at this and begin to explore ways in which to participate. So listening not only internally but externally was critical for us, and it continues to be to this point. But within the Community Foundation, we had already been doing some work in the space. In 2014, the Knight Foundation had invited us to be part of the Knight Community Information Challenge, and that allowed us to support local organizations that were engaged in the building of the Bay Area Media Collaborative. That was critical in our own development. I think that Press Forward is part of the continuation of our development. In 2019, as the Community Foundation went through a series of changes, Nicole Taylor, our president, began to take a look at what communities were saying about the Community Foundation and what they were proposing for the future of the Community Foundation as we developed a strategic plan. And it's important for me to underline that art, culture, were as critical as news, information, and community storytelling. And I say that because it is what led to the shaping of the strategic plan, but also the grant making of the Community Foundation. And in 2021, we launched the Local Journalism Fund. In 4 years, we have been able to give $1 million to 54 organizations, or I should say $1 million in 54 grants to multiple organizations in our community. Within that same period of time, again, listening and learning, it's been important for us to underline the role of donors in our community. I would say, over $85 million have been provided by donors in that same period of time, 4 years, and $6 million have gone to San Mateo and Santa Clara County. So with that background, Nicole recommended that our staff needed to work on creating a strategic concept that will build a future for Press Forward Silicon Valley that took into consideration all those components. And she made 3 requests. She said, build on what you have. The second was have an understanding of the donor practices in our community. And the third, which goes directly to your question, was you need to approach every leader within the Community Foundation to have an understanding of how they are going to play a role. You need to move from thinking of Press Forward as a project and think of it as a institutional pillar of the work that we do, not only through a grant-making strategy dedicated for local journalism, but across all the issue areas that the Community Foundation cares about. That required a period of 6 months for us to talk to every leader to figure out and negotiate how they will play a role, to actually document what would be the time invested necessary over the course of the implementation of Press Forward from every sector of the Community Foundation. I'm talking about just the internal components that were needed in order for us to feel comfortable in the implementation of Press Forward. So that ongoing negotiation continues to this day. Early this year, we were blessed, or at the end of last year, we were blessed with a new VP, Moses Sepien, who is going to be now leading the work for grant-making policy and community engagement at the Community Foundation. And he will be going through a process of examining the impact that we've made up to this point. So the negotiation continues internally, the organizing continues internally, all to make sure that we have an institutional commitment behind the implementation of Press Forward.
Thank you, Mauricio. And, you know, I think about Press Forward every day, but, you know, it's only a portion of the work that you all do. And sometimes when our team goes and spends time with your chapters, it is helpful for every member of the organization to understand what does this look like and how can we all work together. So Nancy, now I'm going to go to you. So we've had many conversations just about how the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque has approached fundraising for local news in Northeast Iowa. And you've had some aha moments and light bulb moments in your journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about your fundraising approach?
Sure. So as a community foundation, we are a fundraiser. I think I'm mic'd. Better?
Much.
As a community foundation, we are a fundraiser, and what we always do is we have a plan. So when we got the Press Forward chapter, we created a plan, and it basically was marketing, communication, and development. So of course, newsletters and direct mail and social media, news articles, and then targeting donors and getting our act together. And as we started to talk to donors, we realized that we needed to give them options. So we've actually set up 4 funds, actually now 5. Number 1 was our Report for America, and that was really important, especially early on, because donors were not necessarily comfortable with giving to a newsroom or to something that they thought was a business. And so to have that 501c3 in place so that when you're chatting with them, you can say, okay, if you're not comfortable with that, although we're going to make you comfortable with it over time, let's do this Press Forward. But then we have a local journalism fund, both endowed and non-endowed, and the endowed fund is now over $600,000. So we're very proud of that. So in eight months to be able to make that happen. We have a fund that we have a wonderful sportscaster that I'll tell you a little bit about that later. He does the Iowa Hawkeyes. And so he set up a fund, the Gary Dolphin Student Support Fund. We didn't do scholarships because, as you know, scholarships are expensive to administer and they don't have an immediate impact, but it's for interns and student support and journalism schools and such. So really giving people options when we go in and chat with them. Our last one, we have a fund, or we did have a fund at the Community Foundation called Inclusive Dubuque. And due to the politics in my state right now, we have changed the name of that fund to the Informed and Engaged Fund, and it will really support our immigrants and our vulnerable populations in their having access to news. So then you plan your work and then you work your plan. And when we launch something like this, we really focus on 3 things. We think about our mission and then what is the messaging around that mission, trusting relationships, and then that this is the long game. We hold endowments, so we're a long game player by trade, and then this issue is absolutely a long game issue for us. So what is that message around our mission, which is that all people thrive? We talk about, I've been coming to the Night Media Forum for a long time, and we talk about informed and engaged, and a lot of people can understand that, and they understand that, when people are engaged in the community is better. We talk a little bit about local news builds community and builds strong communities. If I've got someone who's on the same plane I am, I talk about civic muscle and belonging and bringing those people along. When we started, so Bob Woodward, the former editor of our newspaper, the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald, and he's been at many of these meetings. Right now he's in Ghana doing a tour. I don't know, I've shared this with others, and their newsrooms have started it. The newsroom takes trips with their media subscribers, and it makes money to support the newsroom. So Bob's in Ghana. But Bob and I would do a lot of dog and pony shows. So we would go out, maybe at the country club or talk to the Rotary or whatever. And I had to be late for one, and I showed up and I was sitting in the back of the room, and Bob is presenting, this is a crisis, we're operating in the red, doom and gloom, and there was just, the energy was sucked out of the room. And I was like, what were we thinking? I mean, we know that people like to invest in a winner. People like to invest in innovation and ideas, and afterwards I said, Bob, we've got to change our whole shtick here. This is not, flying, and nobody was pulling their checkbook out. So we really flipped that, and we'll tell you a little bit about that in a little bit. The other thing is trusting relationships, and for me, this whole program, this whole process that we're going through is about trusting relationships. And so with our donors, as a fundraiser, I have a lot of trusting relationships with folks, but I don't know everyone, and I don't always have the right relationship. So if you're raising money, I often bring someone with me. It'll be a door opener or an ambassador, and actually have them sometimes come with me on the visit. And what I've learned is a lot of people are afraid to, quote, ask for money to go on a fundraising visit. And what I share with them is that we are not asking for money. We are talking to a person of wealth who is philanthropic. He wants to give back. He wants to make an impact. We are actually bringing this gentleman an opportunity to make an impact about something that he cares about. And sometimes maybe it isn't the issue of choice for him, and so you move on and you go talk to the next person and give them that big opportunity. But I think that's a real good way to flip the switch. I always talk to my staff too about program officers, and there's probably some in this room. Program officers want to invest in people they trust, organizations they trust that are doing great work, because that's what they're, I'm gotta get, oh, she's saying yes, that's what they want. So, you know, so take the fear out of that is, you know, we want money, and it's really, hey, we have an opportunity to make you shine. The long game, real quickly, I had a donor visit, 3 gentlemen. It was all of significant wealth. The owner of the business, the owner's adult son, and then the man that ran the business. And I could tell I just wasn't getting them on board. And our paper is a family-owned paper that's been around. Why would I invest in their business? Nobody's giving me charitable money. So I was like dealing with that and trying to get them on board with the whole issue. And so finally I said, you know what? We trust each other. We have a long relationship here. How about we're launching this? We're very excited about this work. Give us a small gift. Give us a small big gift, and if you're uncomfortable with this, not thinking it's not charitable, let's go to the Report for America Fund. And then Bob and I will be back in a while, and we are going to ask you for a more significant gift at that time. So they did make a small gift. They each gave us $5,000, and they actually put it in the local journalism fund, so I knew I'd made some progress with them. November, I went back, and the owner gave us $100,000, and the other 2 gentlemen gave us a $50,000. So always don't see that first visit as the visit. You know, you work it and bring them along and let them know that you're counting on them. And they have shared with us that they will continue to support this, that they have begun to understand the importance of local news.
Thank you, Nancy, and congratulations on all that progress, and you're just getting started. And just to give you a glimpse of kind of how we all work together, not just as local chapters, but as the broader network, you know, we think a lot about the messaging. We have a working group that's focused on communications, because sometimes it's not always local news, journalism, democracy. Sometimes it's about community cohesion, civic identity, and just even thinking about what is the role does local news play in your own grant making and marketing strategies. If you're funding education, children's issues, the arts, and no one in the community knows about all that great work those organizations are doing. You know, this work really goes hand in hand. So Lizzy, you know, we've heard from, you know, all of these great leaders who are at this building phase. But you actually have been at this since 2018, years before Press Forward even existed. You've been engaging with donors across the state of North Carolina, as well as making grants to newsrooms in the state, and now you're doing it again by launching a brand new chapter in Press Forward Charlotte. So can you tell us how you are approaching this based on what you've learned over the years?
So I want to say this is a new chapter, but this is not a new effort. I'm looking straight at one of the people who has made this expansion, this hyper-local experiment in Charlotte possible, my colleague from Knight Foundation, Charles Thomas. So thank you, Charles. And I also see around this room the news leaders whose strength, service, and the concreteness of what your work does for Charlotte is also the best case for support any of us could imagine for this kind of investment. So yes, it's a new chapter, and I'm so excited that we are a state where we have a statewide chapter, which is how we've understood ourselves. We've been a statewide effort with regional specificity and a network that covers nearly 75% of the state's 100 counties. That said, we also know that it's going to take more funding, more collaborators, and more people in the boat with us to get where we in North Carolina are headed. So, this hyperlocal experiment in Charlotte is building on the expertise and building what we've learned after deploying $5 million since 2018. We've been at this since about 2018, but first checks, 2018 for sure. And we have to go back to some of the basic questions that Nancy just underlined. What is our shared interest with other funders in Charlotte? News is important, but our way to funding news is likely other things that we all care about. Our kids, our schools, parks, economic development, economic mobility, and thriving. There are lots of different ways to get there. So if other funders want to call this kind of conversation, certainly we're calling it with our partners in Charlotte, is about how might we ensure that our geography or the people that we have at the center of our grant making have what they need. So do you want to invest in a pooled fund, or do you want advice about who might help you achieve your mission? Do you want to meet individual news leaders? Can we help connect you? Do you want help understanding your theory of change or any of the dimensions of how you sell this to your internal partners? There are so many different ways to help support mobilizing funding for local news, but it comes down to building those relationships and being really clear about what you have in common with people. I'm already clear that Charlotte wants in on this, and the Charlotte funder community has showed up in a way that is delighted and really just encouraged me, and I'm looking forward to see who else wants to join us in this work.
So, Lizzy, I want to stick with you for a second, because sometimes when I think about the role of local news plays in our daily lives, like there's a spectrum. On the low end, it's what should I do for fun this weekend? Mm-hmm. Then you move up and try to get more engaged. What's going on in the school board race? What about city council? Or what's this housing development next to me? And then you get into the other end, which is life or death. You need local news to survive. Because I want to talk about how your chapter and all of your partners jumped into action after Hurricane Helene. Can you talk about how you supported the newsrooms and really urged the funders and the community leaders to put local news at the core of relief efforts?
I just want to say again, it's about the relationships. Mm-hmm. And I just want to note that we are 5.5 months-ish since Hurricane Helene. And there are new floods in both Western North Carolina and Kentucky, so I'm really feeling for the people who are still impacted by basic questions about recovery and safety. When you're faced with those kinds of questions, y'all, it's really clear that the relationships you have in advance, our relationships with a network of partners that we'd been funding since well before this storm, and our relationships with Western North Carolina funders, statewide funders, and national funders were what allowed us to move quickly when the moment called us to play that role. So really having the trust means you can move with it when you need it. And so for our partners, and like in practice what that support looked like was making sure that all of the folks that we funded and anyone that they partnered with were accounted for as soon as possible after the storm. The very basics of humanity, including reaching out to other funders because they were both living this disaster and then also trying to help their neighbors recover and survive. Then we also zoomed out and said, again, my colleague and I are not actually in Western North Carolina. We're about 3 hours east of the eastern edge of that disaster zone. So we had the luxury of time, running water, and stable internet to help elevate the voices of newsrooms who were helping make sense of that moment of crisis, who were sharing life-saving info, and then also elevate alongside that for those of us trying to understand what the heck does it mean when we have a hurricane in Appalachia. So navigating both, what do I do to be okay? How do I get drinkable water on the one hand, and focusing on really critical news and information needs inside a disaster zone, while also attending to some also necessary components of response. What does this mean for me? And more importantly, and I think at the core of what the role that we tried to play here was, how can I help? Where's my spot to contribute here? Who's a good mutual aid group? Where's a local newsroom where I could donate some money? Because I know that the only reason we know what's happening in Mitchell County is because there's a journalist on the ground there, likely while they are also dealing with the loss of their home, property, or even death in their family. as a result of the storm. So the through line, again, is these relationships that we had because we had shown up and invested both in the people on the ground serving community news and information needs. Again, I want to note that's not just nonprofit newsrooms or for-profit newsrooms, but it was also community organizations who work with immigrants, also public media, also a variety of other organizations that are training community reporters. So many hands at work. And then also knowing how we could specifically help move money to the field, communicate about what's happening in the zone and outside of the zone, and then accompany people across what we know will be a very long recovery. So relationships and trust before you need them to move. We got really clear about our role, and we used our communications levers to make sure that we could platform people who were doing excellent work and direct people who wanted to help toward their roles.
Thank you.
I forgot to do one thing, though, speaking of roles. I think the folks from Appalachian Funders Network are in the room. If not, I will speak their names into the room. Hello, thank you, y'all. So one of the things that I want to own about how we operate is we're not a rapid response fund. We are not a disaster philanthropy thing, even though in a state like North Carolina, we've done a lot of it because that's what people need and that's what we'll do. Appalachian Funders Network stood up a rapid response fund in response to Helene. And so what that meant, because we had met them through Press Forward in these different convenings, was we had a relationship. And I could direct people who wanted to do rapid response funding to Appalachian Funders Network and make sure that the money got to the people through whatever channels it needed to flow through, rather than me trying to figure out how we could become a rapid response fund overnight. That was a much more complementary set of collaborative roles. And again, I think it shows that there's this ecosystem or this collaborative or a network of folks who all were pointed towards the people who were hurting the most and trying to find each of our respective ways to help.
Thank you, because I have been thinking so much about the collaboration piece, and for the folks who are on with community foundations, you all have done funder collaboratives, collective impact work before in other issue areas. I mean, what about launching a Press Forward chapter has flexed some of that existing muscle for you, or what has been a totally new challenge? I'll open up to any of you on the stage.
I would say that practicing maximum flexibility is important. In other words, yes, you have at the center of the work the community, and I think it is critical and important. And maybe journalism is a vehicle through which we are going to address the aspirations of community. But you need to go beyond journalism as well. You need to take into consideration the arts and culture networks in our community. For example, talking about Silicon Valley in particular, and they are leading the way in advocating for philanthropy to play a role in the same way that folks in the journalism space are doing so. So practicing maximum flexibility for us is paying attention and looking across what is going on in our community and engage with the players that are going to make a critical transformation in the lives of people that we serve.
So we do a lot of collective impact work and a lot of convening, as many of you also do. And so we have just absolutely used that muscle to bring people together, to identify the needs, the issues, and to move the agenda forward. The other thing that we've done a lot of that Christina asked me to talk about was events and event planning, and using that not only to raise money, but also to inform and engage. I mean, we had a wonderful event. We had it at our country club where donors are comfortable coming, and we had Dale Anglin and Sylvia Rivera from the MacArthur Foundation come. And the one thing that's always good to do is get beyond you being the talking head and bring in that expert, bring in those people that from outside to say, oh my gosh, this is wonderful work and it's so important. And we had great results. The people, of course, loved Dale and Sylvia, and the next morning my phone rang and we had 3 different calls of people said, you know what? We're ready to invest, and someone rolled over their IRA. And so that convening, that bringing people together, not only fundraising, but fundraising, and using that as a tool to build community and then specifically to support this work.
I think for us, a new challenge has been language. We have always helped people convene and come together around different issues, but when it comes to news and information, depending on which area you're going into, there seems to be already a distrust from the beginning, right? So you don't know what sort of reaction you're going to get when you use for a simple word as democracy in a rural area might not be as welcome. When I went to the rural areas to have the community events for the survey, there were a lot of questions as to why are you here? Are you trying to create more liberal media in the space? So having those difficult conversations, I think, is going to be a new journey for community foundations to truly understand the importance of language and how critical it is to try to disseminate that distrust in those communities.
Thank you. So we're going to have time for questions, so if you have some, please come to these microphones here. But I'd like for you all to kind of just go down and say, if you had advice for a foundation that wanted to start a chapter, what piece of advice do you have?
Take time as much as you need to do it well and do it at the speed of the community. I think if you want to truly make a change in the community and how we approach news and information, that we have to remember that is the main goal, right? To make it different and make it more diverse. So I think that's my main message, to take the time to do it well.
So one thing, I think what I'd like to do is to just tell a story
Yeah,
real quick. An event that we made money that totally surprised me and we'd never used before. So I told you before, we have this Gary Dolphin, who's a sportscaster and the voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes. So he's a newscaster and he really cares about journalism. And so he offered to do an event for us. And instead of even talking about journalism, but everybody knew that the big bucks, that's where it was going to go, he brought in 3 of the top players from the Iowa Hawkeyes football team and did a panel, and then we did some silent or a live auction, and then he brought 3 top players from the basketball team and did a panel. Drinks were flowing freely. And at the end of the night, we raised $160,000. So it taught, So it taught me something that, you can have something fun and energetic and still make money for your cause, which we always get so serious, and it's like, okay, we're trying to raise money for this piece. And so I encourage you to get innovative and bring ideas. And for, local news, there's so many different things you could do. So take my advice. It was a good one.
Thank you. I think that if we center community, you'll figure out ways in which to support local journalism when you are working through the health issues that you are investing in, or through the housing issues that you're investing in. Look at what are the different issue areas that your particular institution cares about, and ask the question, if you do care about housing and homelessness in your community, what is the role that journalism, local journalism, plays in that context? That would be, one of the advice that I would have.
And Mauricio stole mine, as usual. So what I'll say is also be clear that there will be crises in your community that highlight how indispensable local news is. As a funder, if you want to activate other funders to join you in backing that essential service to your community, help people see the through line. Champion the work of local news leaders and show them concretely what it means when we have this and it works. that pointing positive in a moment of chaos or disorientation, which comes for all of us in different ways, is a moment of opportunity to galvanize support. So don't waste a crisis.
So we're going to start over here.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah, my name is Usha Srinivasan. I'm from Mosaic America. Big shout out to Mauricio, who's Silicon Valley Community Foundation is one of our funders. Thank you so much. I have a question that perhaps applies to those communities that have very high diversity and a constant rate of flux in the demographics like we do in Silicon Valley. So, you know, I appreciate you mentioned kind of bridging the trust gap and language gap. I was wondering what your thoughts were about how do you handle the proliferation of digital channels that are very specific to these communities where they get their information. And so during COVID, for example, you know, we did some outreach work and we found that the vaccine hesitancy in certain cultural communities like Cambodia and Hmong Vietnamese stemmed from messages that they were getting on WeChat or things like that versus, you know, so when you, first of all, there's a problem of aggregating us into groups and calling us all Asian Americans and not recognizing that there is just such intraracial diversity and then coming up with strategies for grabbing attention of people through those channels. So it's a complex task and I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
That is a very interesting question. And it has come up through several other conversations that we're having right now, especially around immigration and our migrant communities and the refugee communities. What has come up is that, you know, those groups usually use WeChat, WhatsApp. Now they're transferring into Signal because of the lack of distrust in whether or not they're going to be singled out or persecuted by having several meetings. So I think there is an appetite for them to have a more formalized local outlet that targets their news in their language. So that's part of the goal that we're trying to do, at least in Press Forward San Antonio, is to help mobilize resources so that our groups that are currently don't have any formal channels are able to establish their own so that they have a more formal way of communicating in their language.
We've got a question. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Or we can have a question.
Hello? Yeah. Hi, Mark Sigel from the 50-year-old Philadelphia Gay News. And I think we are part of the success and challenges of Press Forward. We received our grant from Lemfest. Jim, are you here? Lemfest? Lemfest Philadelphia, and it was for sustainability and communication within our community. And over the last 50 years, our goal always has been to bring our community into the paper because we have no other place to get information about our community and its needs. The first grant from Lemfest was to be part of their Every Voice, Every Vote program. We utilized that funding to make sure that we got empowerment of the LGBT community. We never realized how far that would go, but in the new mayoral administration, we're about a third of the cabinet now of that. And we also helped to make sure that our community realized that we were a place to go. So in the last 6 months, there have been two overwhelming problems in the community, and the first calls came privately to our reporters. First one, which was of great importance, was we have a health clinic which serves only LGBT people. And their patient base is 12,000 people. We learned very quickly that organization was in dire straits and might go out of business. And nobody was writing about it, talking about it, and the organization itself would not talk about it. We had to do investigative reporting. We had to go to the court system, get the court records, find out where it was, and finally put it on the map. And due to that, we uncovered the fact that they didn't have money to reach payroll for their 100 staffers. From that, we went to the city and said, what can you do about this? And they said, well, there's these, and we again had to go through the legal system with our lawyers. Point being is, it's open. Those 12,000 people are being served. And we did that from our pulpit. Same thing is now happening in a second regarding our city, and a good deal of this is happening because of funding being taken away, and I think we're all going to be going through that in one way, shape, or form, is that our community center is having a lot of problems. They have a new board, and they've just discovered that the current administration of the center itself has failed in several regards, and so we've been the one to bring this forward to our community, and now forums are being taking place, and we're able to deal with that kind of thing. That's the success. We're making change. Tomorrow in Philadelphia, we will convene a senior summit for LGBT seniors who are thrown out of other homes. And that summit will have the Director of Aging for the state of Pennsylvania. It will have the Director of Aging from the city of Philadelphia. And we're going to bring those resources together and all those groups. The problem being is the money we received from LemFest, which was to help us go for sustainability, is now going primarily for journalism. So we're trying to make the change because 50-year-old publication, we got a long way to go to modernize. And that's our pitfall. Any suggestions?
I'd love to talk to you after this, so if you'll meet me in the back of the room, let's talk more.
I'm not a shrinking violet.
I'm sure. I'll look forward to it.
Hey, Dan. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more question. Noi, go ahead, and then we'll all head to lunch.
Thanks so much, Christina. I'm Noi Thrupka from Type Investigations, which is a nonprofit investigative newsroom. And I love hearing from you all how you're talking to community members and funders about the importance of journalism and civic engagement. I do investigative journalism, which sometimes is not viewed as kindly by people in power and by people with wealth. So, it's all about holding power to account, digging through people's dirty laundry, filing FOIA requests, doing the kind of work that our colleague was talking about here at the Philadelphia Gay News. So to what extent are you able to kind of create narratives around these aspects of journalism in terms of examining power structures and the influence of powerful individuals when you're talking to powerful people who you wish to become engaged with our particular field?
Go ahead, Mauricio.
I just wanted to briefly respond. I appreciate your question. I think that it is important to ask ourselves that on an ongoing basis. In the context of San Mateo and Santa Clara counties in Silicon Valley, we took a group of community leaders and had a retreat last year to begin to ask questions around the future of Press Forward in our community. So their guidance is critical. As I mentioned earlier, Ramona was the first one to knock at the door saying we need to be doing this. And she's also a grantee of the Community Foundation, so there is an ongoing partnership there. What surfaced in our community was an interesting tension between what is journalism in a very traditional definition and what is community storytelling. And what surfaced in that conversation was that communities that have not had access to the resources that journalism has created in the past and have offered in the past to various different communities have decided to commit journalist acts without being journalists. And what they are defining as an outcome of that is community storytelling. This is where you hear the poetry. This is where you see the murals. This is where you see the joy and the challenges that come from, the paid and lived experience of communities. Next week, we are going to have our first advisory gathering with 15 advisors that are going to be curating the future of our work. And we anticipate that the conversation will continue to reflect on this power dynamic that exists in our community between communities and philanthropy, and trying to resolve that as we move forward and grow our local journalism giving.
And for us, it's very important that we don't dissuade from what the initial goal of Press Forward was, to support news, not just to the current outlets that are out there, but also to allow new ones to come up. And so we have a steering committee that is made up of former and current journalists, and also people from the field. So one of those individuals is Diana Fuentes, who I believe is the president of IRE. So it's very important for us to keep those conversations.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our esteemed panel. Let's give them a round of applause.